guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I'm going to be talking about the 11 books I read in the month of September. So September was the month of the Bookoplathon, which was my readathon. It was also the month of the magical readathon, which is another readathon that I participated in. And I actually did all right, you know. I felt like I was a bit slumpy throughout the month, but I read 11 books. I read over 4,000 pages, which anything over 4,000 is like a good month for me. And I also like the quality of the books was pretty high. We had nothing below 3 stars, which is great. Now, of course, I am incredibly eager to talk to you guys about all of the books that I read in the month of September, but before I do that, I am so thrilled to introduce you guys to the sponsor of this video, which is Book of the Month. Now, I am so incredibly excited that Book of the Month reached out to me to bring you this sponsorship, because if you are unfamiliar with what Book of the Month are, they are a subscription service that bring you a monthly curated selection of hardbacks across genres at a price that is more affordable than you can pick them up at retail. Now, Book of the Month currently exclusively ship to the US, so unfortunately if you are an international customer you will not be able to get your hands on this service, but that is one of the reasons why I was so excited when Book of the Month reached out to me. They seem to have this uncanny knowledge of what books are going to blow up and be in the list of like the best books of the year, because if you go through the selections on their website, there are so many best-selling books, some of them from debut authors and up-and-coming authors that have blown up since their release. Now, I do have an offer for you guys today. If you click on the link at the top of my description box and enter the code BOO at checkout, you will be able to get your first Book of the Month book for the discounted price of $9.99. Once you've signed up, you can skip your subscription at any point if none of the books are taking your fancy, or you can instead pick from their backlist. But let's have a little bit of a look at the October selections. So the first one is in the pretty blue box, and this one is dun dun dun, The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. This one is a chunky monkey, and it is a historical fiction set in 1950s America following Emmett Watson, who after his family have landed on hard times, he is traveling across the country to California with his brother to start a new life. We also have Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead. This one is a literary fiction that features a historical heist where the main character falls in with a crew who are planning to rob this big fancy hotel and use the main character as a fence. However, during the heist, things very quickly start to fall apart. We also have the book that would have been my pick for October, which is The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. This one is a steamy, quirky, rom-com style romance where the main character is a witch, and after going through a bad breakup, she decides to curse her ex on a whim, and she doesn't really think anything of it until the ex in question comes back into town, and she finds out that actually the curse that she placed on him worked a little better than she intended. The synopsis for this just sounds chaotic. I think this would be a great like spooky season, like fun, quirky, witchy read, and the cover on this is actually giving me like really strong Bewitched vibes. Next we have a speculative fiction pick, which is The Perishing by Natasha Dion. This one is a little bit of a historical story where the main character, who is a journalist, wakes up in 1930s Los Angeles with absolutely no memories. However, after encountering a fireman that she's pretty sure she's never met before, however she keeps drawing his face, she realizes that she may actually be an immortal that has been sent to this time for a very important reason. And then the final October selection is Everything We Didn't Say by Nicole Bart, and this one is a psychological thriller about a woman who was pushed out of her hometown after high school but then returns years later to solve the riddle of her family and also a horrific crime. As well as the monthly selections, you do also have a great backlist of books to choose from, and you can add one of these to your monthly subscription for $10.99. I have a couple of examples of the add-ons here today. We have The Apples Never Fall by Liane Moriarty, which is a contemporary fiction family drama that follows a wealthy family whose matriarch goes missing. And I also have one of the fantasy picks, which is The Book of Magic by Alice Hoffman. This one is the final book in the Practical Magic series, which you may have seen the movie movie. I love the practical magic movie, and this one is once again a bit of a family drama story that has like magic and curses and follows the women of the Owens family. So here we have a pretty stunning selection of books across a range of genres. So if anything I've said about book of the month today sounds interesting to you and you would like to try it out for yourself, please do go ahead, click on the link at the top of my description box and enter the code BOO to get your first book for $9.99. And once again, a huge thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. So getting straight into those September statistics, in the month of September I read 4,151 pages across 11 books, and this broke down to an average of 138 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 4 3-star reads, 6 4-star reads, and just 1 5-star read, which is disappointing, but the overall average rating for the month was high at 3.72 stars per book. For the demographics in September, I read 4 young adult books and 7 adult books. For the formats of those books, I read 8 physical books, 2 comics, and 1 audiobook, although I will say that with the audiobook I did read along physically as well as listening to the audio at the same time. For the genres, it's a pretty predictable mix from me. We had 5 fantasy books, 3 romance, 2 paranormal, and 1 science fiction. And for the places where I sourced these books from, I really need to sort this out because 9 of the books are books that I hauled in 2021 and only 2 of them are from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2021. So getting into the reviews, we can knock out 3 in 1 because the first 3 books I read in September were the Bone Witch series by Becca. You guys may have noticed I started doing a vlog series where I read an entire series within the space of a vlog and bring you guys my thoughts. I'm doing this for a variety of reasons. 1, so that I'm not starting a series and then just continuing it for years and years and never finishing it. 2, so that I can let you guys know whether these series are worth it in their entirety. And 3, so I can read some of the more popular and hyped series that I haven't got to yet, and you know, the ones that people always talk about, and decide like what my thoughts on them are. So the Bone Witch by Becca was a gift from the lovely Kristen, so thank you so much to Kristen for gifting this to me. And this was also my Patreon pick for the month of August, which I pushed back a little bit. It could have been July, solely so that I could make the video on this series. But this is a young adult fantasy series where we are following a protagonist called Taya, who is a bone witch. Bone witches are useful in this world, however people don't really like them because they are essentially necromancers. So Taya comes from a small village and her brother has been conscripted into the army, and one day he is unfortunately killed by a deva, and deva are these big monstrous creatures that the necromancers are essentially tasked with killing, and that is the purpose they fulfill in this world. So when Taya's brother's body is returned to their family for burial, Taya is obviously very upset and she accidentally raises him from the dead. So another bone witch called Michaela is sent to check out Taya's powers, and she takes her away to join the rest of the Asha, who are also people who are gifted with abilities, although most of them are not bone witches. There's only currently 2 bone witches, which is Michaela and Taya, and there Taya is trained in her abilities. Now the way that the narration in this series is told is that Taya has seemingly fallen from grace, and we have these sections in between chapters where Taya has been exiled and she is telling her story to a bard, and we as the reader don't know why she's been exiled, and the actual chapters of the book are the story she's telling the bard, detailing her life up until a point where everything kind of went wrong. So I really enjoyed this series. I gave the first 2 books, Bone Witch and Heartforger, 4 stars, and I gave Shadow Glass 3 stars. I really loved the atmosphere in this series. Becca is a Chinese Filipino author, and something that I always associate with Asian fantasy is how atmospheric and immersive the writing is within like the world building, and there's just like a very, I don't want to say slow pace to the story, but it is like a very gentle, absorbing pace, and that definitely came through and was true to this series, and it's something that I absolutely love and is one of the reasons why I do really adore Asian fantasy. I also really loved the deva in here and how they were woven throughout the plot. I loved Taya's journey and how she kind of reached this point where she went into into exile. There's also a romance in here that I actually really liked, and I like the build up to that actually, because you kind of get inklings throughout the first book in this series that there is going to be a romance, but there are a multitude of characters that could be the love interest, and I thought that the way that that was revealed was really well done, and I liked that whole build up situation. And the romance in here as well was just a really supportive, wholesome romance, and you didn't have any relationship drama in it, which I really appreciated, because that is something that you generally get in all stories that contain a romance. But with this, it kind of acknowledged that there was plenty of drama in the plot, that you didn't need drama in the relationship to make everything angsty and dramatic. My only kind of criticism for the series, and the reason especially why Shadowglass got 3 stars, is because this style of Taya narrating to the bard is present up until the very end of the final book, and you know ahead of time some things that happen because you are getting these excerpts of Taya in present day, as we are also going back through her life story. So there's like big emotional dramatic moments that you know are going to happen, and I feel like the timeline should have really converged at the latest halfway through this book, and then it should have like continued in the present timeline to make some of the reveals a little bit more impactful. It also got a little bit confusing in parts, because an example is that in the present timeline, Taya would be confronting an antagonist while also confronting them for the first time in the past timeline. So in parts it just got a little bit jumbled about which iteration it was, with everything kind of being so similar, like with it being the same person confronted, if that makes sense. But overall, I would recommend this series. I think that it was pretty good. It's not a new favorite or anything, but I'm really glad I read it and I enjoyed my time reading it as well. After beasting my way through the Bone Witch trilogy in a reasonably short amount of time, I did not finish another book for 2 weeks because I was making my way through Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. So this one is, I just hit myself in the face with it. This one is a chunker, and it is the final book in the Tawny Man trilogy and the 9th book in the Realm of the Eldlings overall. So the Realm of the Eldlings is an adult fantasy universe. 3 of the trilogies in it follow Fitz, and this is one of the Fitz trilogies. So in the very first book, Assassin's Apprentice, Fitz is a young boy. He's 6 years old, and he's dropped on the doorstep of the keep by his maternal grandfather, who wants him to go back to his father. However, when his father, who is the prince in waiting, Prince Chivalry, realizes that his bastard son is on his way to him, he abdicates the throne and moves to the countryside with his wife, which leaves Fitz in a position where people don't really know what to do with him. And so he is raised by the stable master Burrick up until he reaches an age where the king takes an interest in him and trains him to be an assassin. So the Tawny Man trilogy is set 15 years after the events of the Farseer trilogy, and we once again follow Fitz as he is thrust back into court life. There's also a lot of politics in here regarding the different factions of magic within this world. We have the wit, which is the ability to communicate with animals, and the skill, which is the ability to communicate with other people, amongst other things. It's more complex than that. And we also have an epic quest to cement some allies and political relationships in this series. I have noticed a bit of a theme here, because I gave Fool's Fate 4 stars, and I gave the last book in the Farseer trilogy 5 stars, but in hindsight it was probably more of a 4 or a 4.5. And I also gave the final book in the Live Ship Traders, and I gave the rest of the books I've read by Robin Hobb 5 stars. So with this one, and also with the final book in the Farseer trilogy, we have hundreds of pages at the beginning of the book that are super slow. So in the Farseer trilogy, it was hundreds of pages of walking. In Fool's Fate, it was hundreds of pages of traveling by boats, and one of the characters was seasick, and it kept coming back to this character, and it was just super boring to read. And I know the reason why this happens in the series. It is so that you spend so much time with the characters that you're super immersed in the story and really connected to them and what's going on, so that the emotional revelations that always come in Robin Hobb books hit you a lot harder. In Assassin's Quest, that worked really well for me. Like, I thought that the good bits were so good that they outweighed the bad bits, but in this one I found the last half of this to be a little bit rushed. It was a little bit frustrating in that there were big impactful things happening, but they were happening off page, so we would see a bit of them but then the bits that I felt could be very emotionally impactful happened away from the main character. Now in the Fitz books we do have a very isolated perspective because we only follow Fitz, so the scope of what we see is limited to the scope of Fitz's interest in what is going on. So you will find that there are really cool, exciting things going on in the world, but because Fitz is concerned with his own things and his own relationships, his own dramas, and the things that are directly concerning him, we don't get a whole ton of focus on this stuff. And that makes sense in the context of some things that are going on that we explore a little bit more, I guess, in the live ship traders. But in terms of like Fitz's personal relationships and certain characters, I just didn't like the way that they were done as much in this one. The series as a whole as well is a little bit disjointed. So the first book in this trilogy follows a lot on the politics of the witted and that type of magic, and then Golden Fool, the second book in this series, is kind of like the start of a new series setting up for this epic quest that the characters are going to go on. And then this book focuses on the quest, and the second two books essentially leave all this witted stuff behind, and then right at the end of this you kind of have a wrap up of everything that happened in the first book, like an, oh yeah, I left that open, we need to close it at the end of this book, so we'll just kind of do it in this one paragraph recap. And coming from Robin Hobb, who is an author that I know to provide really compelling stories that are, I don't know how well thought out her stories are ahead of time, because she keeps just like adding series on when she feels like writing them, which is absolutely fine because it does work really well, because she does keep managing to expand the world in a way that feels organic and introduce you to new things, make the scope bigger, like it was always intended to be such a large series, even though maybe it wasn't intended to start off with. And yeah, I just thought the wrap up of this one was a little bit sloppy compared to what I've come to expect from Hobb. That being said, love the Fitz, love the Fool, still love Hobb, still love this series, and I'm very intrigued to carry on to the Rainwild Chronicles because I believe that we are heading to a little bit of a different style with those books because they have a bit more of a YA tone to them. And also I'm assuming we will be revisiting the more like live ship traders kind of area of the world than the Farseer area of the world. I then read two comics that are in different series but set in the same world, and they are Angel Volume 1, Being Human, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer Volume 2, Once Bitten. So these series go together. These are the Angel and Buffy reboot comics. I read the first volume of Buffy earlier this year, I think it was during the 48-hour Bookoplathon, and I absolutely loved how the story has been modernized and brought into the year 2019. The technology is updated, the clothes are updated, while still managing to capture the essence of the show, and also most importantly to me, who has a lot of nostalgia for this series, the voices of the characters. So I had different thoughts on these. This one is by Geordie Blair and this one is by Brian Edward Hill, so they do have different authors, but they are working together with like interwoven storylines and also some like crossover specials. But something I really love about the reboots as a whole is that they are weaving into the narrative at an early stage characters and plot lines that only come into the shows much later, and I find it really interesting how they are doing that in a way that still makes it kind of relative to the canon. Even though these aren't canon, it makes sense within what you already know about the Buffyverse if you are a fan of the shows. So Angel Volume 1 I did enjoy. I gave this one 4 stars, but it was very hard for me to rate. I can't tell you whether 4 stars is an accurate rating on this because this one very much felt like setup. We had the introduction of some characters that only appear later in Angel, and I'm very intrigued about what part they are going to play being brought into the storyline a lot earlier in different circumstances. But the thing that I most enjoyed about this is that it gives Angel a different backstory to the one that I'm familiar with, and I'm really intrigued to see how that plays out in later volumes. But it was just a whole ton of setup really. I have no idea where the story is going to go. I enjoyed it for what it was, but I didn't really get like a great feel for it in this one. Buffy Volume 2 however did something quite dramatic with the plot that is very different to any events that happen in the show, and I'm not necessarily against it because I expect these reboots to follow different storylines and explore different things, and it still is kind of plausible within the realms of the Buffyverse. But I gave this one 3 stars as opposed to the 5-star rating that I gave the first one because the art in this volume just really lets it down. So the first one was illustrated by Dan Mora. I read a few comics, I don't read a whole ton, so I'm not not super well versed in like the comic book world, but I believe that Dan Mora is a reasonably well-known artist, and he did such an amazing job working on the likenesses of the actors who played the original characters in this show. Like, the art was so stunning, and I loved everything that he did with the art of that first volume. And in this one, like, they have a new artist, which is fine because I know that it's quite common in comics to have different artists do different plot arcs, but the characters were unrecognizable throughout a lot of this. I just don't like the art style. The characters, like the majority of the main cast of this, are supposed to be teenagers and they looked old. There was also kind of like a lack of definition and detail within the art, and I was just not a fan. Like, that one, I think they look amphibious. I think the characters in this art style look amphibious, and I don't think I would have minded as much if Dan Mora hadn't done such an amazing job on the first volume of this, because with it being a reboot, like, the characters don't have to look identical to the actors that originally played them. However, I feel like if you have the first volume in this series doing such a good job of representing those actors, that has to be recurring throughout the rest of the series. So essentially it was like 5 stars for the plot in here, and Geordie Blair still does a really good job of bringing the voice of the characters to life, but 1 star for the art because I didn't like it. I think that David Lopez does work on volume 3 of this comic series, but then I do think that there are other artists, so I am going to persevere with this one, but just really disappointed with the art in volume 2. And Angel volume 1 was a gift from the wonderful Harry, and Buffy volume 2 was a gift from Hannah, so thank you very much to Harry and Hannah for sending these my way. I then finished a book that I started at the end of August. It took me the longest time to read for no reason, and that was Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. So this had been on my shelves for a long time. I picked this up on recommendation from Elliot Brooks, and I read this because the lovely Aaron from Booked and Busy invited myself and Cody to join her Busy Bee book club for the month of August. So this one is a historical steampunky kind of fantasy that follows a man called Thomas Senlin, who is going on his honeymoon to the Tower of Babel with his new wife Maya. This tower is kind of legendary. He has his traveling guide. He's feeling all optimistic about it, and then as soon as he gets to the tower, it is pretty much nothing like he imagined it would be. So this tower, you can't see the top of it. It rises up through the clouds. It has a sprawling market around the outside, and every floor of the tower is something a little bit different. Thomas is outside of the tower. He enters the market with his wife, and she wanders off to go and look at a few stalls, and she never returns. So after standing there waiting for her for 2 days, took him 2 days to become concerned, Senlin finally heads into the tower to start searching for her, because as she left, she said jokingly, "I'll meet you at the top of the tower." So this book is Senlin going through the first 4 floors of the tower searching for his wife. I gave this one 3 stars. The writing style I did end up enjoying. It was a little bit to adjust to going into it because it wasn't what I expected. It reads very much like Agatha Christie. It has an Agatha Christie like historical style to the writing, and Thomas Senlin is just this bumbling pompous idiot throughout the beginning of this. He has so much privilege. He doesn't think that anything could ever possibly go wrong to him. Boy, was he wrong. So eventually he kind of grew on me. I still don't love him, but he grew on me, the writing grew on me, and I was really enjoying those elements. However, I found that as I went through this book, my enjoyment of the book very much depended on how much I enjoyed the theming and the plot of the particular floor that Senlin was on. So my favorite floors in this tower were floor 2 and 3. The beginning I was still kind of adjusting into the story, and I really didn't like the 4th floor at all. I also found the action scenes in here to be a little bit muddled. It reads kind of conceptually in terms of it being, there are plot threads that tie the floors together and also come to fruition at the end in the conflict, which I did really appreciate, but it reads very much as like a segmented, I am on floor 1, this is what floor 1 is, this is what happened on floor 1, I'm now going up to floor 2, repeat kind of situation. And I have heard amazing things about the plot of this series, so I feel like it is a series that is going to be a lot more well plotted than I'm giving it credit for, but you only really find out the further you get into the series. And I have also heard that the books get better as they go, and you get more of a cohesive plot as we go throughout the series. So I am willing to give book 2 a try in this series, even though I didn't love it, and then if I do enjoy book 2, I will continue. And it's now a perfect time because the final book, I believe, is released in November. But for the first installment in this series, it was okay. There were elements I enjoyed, there were elements I didn't, but I'm willing to continue to give it a chance. I then read my only 5-star read of September, which was, of course, Morning Star by P.S. Bryant. This is also the one that I listened to in audio whilst reading along. And the reason for that is that I can't listen to anything that's sci-fi or fantasy and exclusively audio. But the audiobooks are so good for this series that I really wanted to experience them. So I read along to the audiobook. Would definitely recommend if you want to read this series and you like audio to check out the audiobooks. They are all available on Scribd and the narration is so good. So this is the final book in the core Red Rising trilogy, and if you are unaware, Red Rising is an adult sci-fi story which has a lot of martial fantasy elements and also a big dystopian uprising plot. So in here we are following a guy called Darrow, who is a red in this caste system where reds are right at the bottom and golds are right at the top, and the reds believe that they are mining for a substance called helium-3 because the solar system needs it to terraform so that everybody can escape the dying planet Earth. However, after Darrow's wife orchestrates her own capture and execution to turn herself into a martyr and spur Darrow into action, Darrow joins up with a rebel group that take him to the surface of Mars, only for him to find out that the planets have already been terraformed. So from that point onwards, Darrow commits himself to infiltrating the Golds to try and take them down from the inside. Now, I liked Red Rising, adored Golden Sun, and loved Morning Star. Golden Sun is still my favorite book in this series. My favorite thing about this series is the level of drama and angst. Darrow is just so emo, and this series is just so dramatic. Like, P.S. Brown does not pull punches. All throughout the series you have characters just dropping off and dying left, right and center. We also have really dramatic like blood feuds between characters and this level of angst and like grey morality, and Darrow is this flawed hero, and something that I really love about him is that he makes terrible decisions and decisions that will hurt a lot of people to further the cause. And I say it in quotation marks because it's arguable that like the cause could be furthered in other ways, and Darrow is making the most drastic choices, but I just love how flawed he is. I love how many mistakes he makes. I love that there are real consequences to the actions of the characters in this series. I'm in love with a ton of the characters in this series. Ragnar, Severo and Victra are my favorites, and I'm just so glad I read this. I am firmly a part of the Red Rising fan club. I am obsessed. Golden Sun, one of my favorite books of the year, and I'm really excited to get into the second trilogy in the series. I did see that it is possible that we have a release date for the third book in the second trilogy, which may or may not be called Lightbringer and may or may not be released in July, but I think I want some like solid concrete evidence that that book is definitely coming out, and then I'm going to make a start on the second trilogy, and I'm so excited. I heard that the second book in that trilogy is like the best book out of all of them, and it's also multi-perspective, which I'm really excited about. But if you like grimdark stories, if you like your martial fantasy, a lot of this is structured on the Roman Empire, if you like books with like really fast-paced plots but are like super twisty, really brutal in the decisions that the author makes on behalf of the characters, and also has some characters that you're gonna root for, then I would definitely recommend you pick up this series. But if you're going into Red Rising, give it at least halfway and then a little bit, because I was very confused and wasn't loving the first half of Red Rising, and it definitely pulled through in the second half for me. And then the final 3 books that I read in the month were all romance. So the first one was the Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. This one is a contemporary adult romance following an autistic main character called Stella, whose parents are pressuring her essentially to get married, have kids, all of that stuff. However, Stella doesn't really do well with people, and she especially does not do well in terms of romance, so she hires a male escort to teach her about sex. I gave this one 4 stars. I did really enjoy it, but I also didn't like some things about it, and I do feel like I need to clarify those things that I don't like about it, because it's more of like just expectation. So when I go into a romance and a book that looks like this, I'm expecting like an uplifting, feel-good, fun romance, and this definitely had those elements, but it also had a lot of difficult and hard-hitting elements in here that really triggered my anxiety throughout the first half of this book. There is one particular scene in here which was the one that I found the most upsetting, and I'm not going to spoil it for you guys obviously, but we'll call it the family dinner scene, and everything that kind of went on in that, as somebody who has had social anxiety in the past and still struggles a little bit in social situations now, I just found that really anxiety inducing. Now things like this, things that make me a little bit anxious reading about, are not things that I mind reading about. I just feel like I needed a little bit of a warning going into this, because this book continually puts Stella into uncomfortable situations to kind of illustrate what life is like for her as an autistic woman and the things that she struggles with. And throughout a lot of this book, Michael doesn't know that Stella is autistic, so he doesn't know that he's putting her in uncomfortable situations, and that is fine in terms of representing what it is like for Stella to be autistic. I just did not expect the level of discomfort that that would bring. It was kind of like a second hand kind of thing, because Stella was so uncomfortable, it was making me feel uncomfortable, and I've heard that that is a recurring theme throughout this series. So I just kind of wanted to highlight it to let you guys know to not do what I did and go into this expecting it to be like a celebration and like feel good and just give you like funny, warm, gushy moments throughout the entire book, because yes, it does do that, but there are some quite uncomfortable moments, or in my case that one instance that was especially anxiety inducing. That being said, you guys have said that the representation in here for autism is on point, and like a lot of you guys identified with it. So while I can't recommend it for its autistic rep because I'm not autistic myself, I can pass along the recommendation from a whole ton of my subscribers that have said that this book really made them feel seen. I really liked the romance in here. There is one problematic scene that people always talk about, we'll call it the bathroom kiss scene, which I felt was a little bit out of character for the love interest, because it showed a level of aggression that wasn't really present within his character throughout the rest of the book. He was generally like really sweet and kind and patient, and then that was just like a really weird moment in here. But aside from that, the romance really won me over. I found Michael to be an especially attractive love interest, and I was all about that dynamic and the relationship between him and Stella. A lot of it was like really sweet and wholesome, and I loved the way that they interacted with each other. I also loved the elements of romance in terms of like, I obviously can't say without spoilers, but I like how the whole end of this book went down, and in terms of the romantic elements, I absolutely adored this. I did find it to be just a little bit cheesy in parts. There's elements of dirty talk in here that were just like a slight bit cringe, and there was that instance, like the bits that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, which once again were fine. I can read stuff like that. I just kind of wish I'd had the knowledge going into this that there were going to be moments like that in it, and it wasn't. Because if I go into a dark romance, I expect some dark stuff, and I don't mind. I breeze right through them. With a brightly illustrated book that's been recommended to me as like a rom-com feel-good romance, I wasn't expecting them going into it, if that makes sense, and I would have just rather have been prepared. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this, and I'm really excited to read the rest of the books in this series. But now that I'm going in knowing that they're going to deal with some more difficult topics, I think that I will be able to enjoy this series a little bit more than I enjoyed this first installment. And then the final 2 books that I read in September were books 2 and 3 of the Wicked Villain series by Katie Robert. So the Wicked Villain series is an adult erotic romance series where each installment is a retelling of a Disney story where the hero or heroine falls in love with the villain instead of their love interest. Sometimes the love interests are involved in the stories, but Learn My Lesson was a retelling of Hercules with Megara, Hercules and Hades in a throuple, and Worthy Opponent was a retelling of Peter Pan between Hook and Tinkerbell. So I gave the first book in this series 5 stars. I think Katie Robert writes smut amazingly. Like, her smut is so good, and these are all BDSM, so they do delve into some darker themes within the erotica in here. Like, the first one is consensual non-consent, and a lot of these center around a sex club that is run by Hades. But learned my lesson, I gave 3 stars. I did enjoy it. I really liked Meg as a protagonist. I'm not sure if I like thruples. I've had this same issue with reverse harems where I'm just not that into it because I'm not as invested in the polyamorous side of it, I guess. But I really liked Hercules in here as well, and I did struggle to get a little bit of a read on Hades. I also felt like the plot in this one was very rushed. Like, we had multiple threads going on that related to the backstories of some of the characters, because this one ties in a lot to the Neon Gods series, I believe, as all of these are set in Carver City. The Neon Gods series is set in Olympus, which is where Hercules is from, and also Hades. And then we also have the Sabine Valley series, which I think some of the characters from later on in the Wicked Villain series are from Sabine Valley. But we had a lot of plot threads in here, and then the conflict happened in the last 2 chapters. It was like 15 pages, so that was a little bit rushed for me. And then A Worthy Opponent, I gave 4 stars. I loved the relationship between Tink and Hook. We do have some mentions of a previous abusive relationship in this one, so content warning for that if you need it. It is mostly off page, but it does play like a big part in the plot, because in this one we are following Tinkerbell, who entered into a contract with Hades to work at his club because she was escaping an abusive relationship with Peter, and her contract is just about to run out, and as soon as she leaves the underworld, Peter tracks her down. So this one contains I don't know if it's a forced marriage or a marriage of convenience, but she essentially ends up marrying Hook very early on, as he approaches her and says that he will take down Peter for her, providing that she marries him. I loved the relationship between Tink and Hook in here. Tink obviously has some trust issues. Hook is trying to win her over, but she just cannot trust him. And A Worthy Opponent, solid, really enjoyed it. I'm now about 50 pages into the beast, and I'm going to be finishing off that series, this series even, as my first reads in the month of October. So there you have it. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of September. We have quite a few of them. I was a very busy bee. I think when I'm done with the Wicked Villains, I'm going to be taking a break from romance for a little bit, because I'm just really in the mood for fantasy right now. My autumn reads tend to be quite chunky atmospheric fantasies, and now that the weather is finally starting to get into the crisp, cool vibes, I really just want to like hunker down with a good fantasy. And I do think while I'm enjoying the Wicked Villain series, I think reading them back to back is a little bit much. So that's gonna put me on romance for a little bit as well. But let me know if you have read any of the books that I've mentioned in this video and what you guys thought of them. And of course, once again, a huge thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. Please don't forget to go check out the link in my description box if you are interested, and use the code BOO to get your first Book of the Month book for $9.99. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.